All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, I'm joined by Colonel William Burner Dunn. He's flown in a helicopter for the Marine Corps combat missions, 30 years retired. We're talking about the midair collision that took place, sadly, over Reagan National Airport. The last body just recently recovered. Before we went to the break, we were talking about, Colonel, what could have caused this. DEI, lack of training. Obviously, these are the arguments that are out there. Lack of training, air traffic control. You touched on air traffic control. Maybe there was some confusion. Please expound on that.
Well, everything that I've seen open source is that there were supposed to be 2 individuals that night operating in the tower. Now, the tower responsibilities can be broken up in different ways. Sometimes one controller will control helicopters. Sometimes one controller will control fixed wing. I don't know what their process is there, and obviously it could change daily based on the traffic. But what we do know is one person instead of 2 was managing all that traffic that night because somebody was let go early. Now, the DEI argument, I've heard 2 sides of it.
Okay.
Side one is they, and who is they, correct? Right? The system is saying that FAA turned down qualified people based on their skin color.
Right.
And that does not mean that the 2 controllers that were there and the one that remained were not 100% qualified, regardless of their race, gender. We just don't know.
Fair. Right.
What should be very easily identified is the training jacket of those individuals.
What do you mean by that? The training jacket, literally, do you mean that literally?
Literally, when you are going through air traffic control, and one of the individuals I work with was an ATC individual, you get graded and trained, and you have to keep a record of that. I don't know if they do it these days electronically, but in mine, aviation training jacket, it's a paper copy. So if anyone was below average, we should be able to see that in the investigation.
Wow. Okay. That's okay. That is well. Okay. Well, and then, but this begs the question: if they were below average, and maybe DEI was a way in which hiring took place, would we even know? I mean, would they even fill out that paperwork, correctly? I mean. That's a question I would have. Frankly, I would have, Colonel. This is what's so frustrating, because it's sad to me that we even have to consider that it could be DEI. Never mind the fact that obviously these people were understaffed, and that should have never happened. You mentioned that before. You mentioned a scenario that I recall when you were in the Marine Corps. Always a Marine, I know, but when you were flying. And where the air traffic control made a mistake, and you almost lost your life along with your crew. Can you share that story?
Yes, we were doing a CASEVAC mission out of Al Taqaddum Air Base in Iraq, and we were taking off the active duty runway. And the runways are based typically on the wind direction. You want to land into the wind. So as we're taking off, somewhere along the line, the wind must have changed enough to where they switched the runway. And they cleared our section to take off the same exact time they cleared an Air Force C-17 to land.
Man.
So I heard that go. I heard the call sign, cleared to land, and I heard the runway. That brought my attention. I talked about the cues that a pilot has. So I looked up, and initially I did not see this airplane bearing down on us. And all of a sudden it's filling our windscreen. And
wow.
We all broke. I think we broke right to get out of the way, and we avoided it. They did their landing, though. They continued on and landed. I don't know if they ever saw us. And when we talked to the tower, it was just a mistake. Okay, wow. That happens, unfortunately. The problem is if you are in a scenario in a very highly densely populated traffic area, it's harder to recover from those mistakes. And that, and I don't know that the air traffic control actually made a mistake, because they called traffic to the Black Hawk. The Black Hawk responded, "I have the traffic." What they didn't do is confirm that they were talking about the same airplane. And that, I believe, is going to become a factor in this mishap investigation, because everything that the ATC did, in my mind, was correct. Other than if they knew they were above altitude,
right,
they should be able to determine that from the tapes.
Right.
If they knew they were above altitude, they should have made an altitude correction call. That could be a scenario where one controller was too busy and did not catch that.
Oh, that's heartbreaking. That is honestly, that is heartbreaking, Colonel. What would that have sounded like? I mean, or what? In other words, okay. So if the call was incorrect, if the air traffic controller perhaps missed the call, perhaps, or they were talking about different planes, but they didn't realize it, what should have been communicated? Maybe it was communicated. Maybe a person didn't hear it. But what should have been communicated? Well,
a typical traffic call that I'm used to hearing is, I'll use my call sign when I was the CEO of the Gunfighters. It'd be like, Gunfighter 06, you have traffic 12 o'clock, jetliner inbound landing runway 33. That would have told me that, if I had been flying that night in a Cobra, that would have told me that there's an airplane coming in.
Okay.
And I would know where 33 is, because pilots are responsible for knowing where they are all the time.
Okay.
Knowing that's the active runway, I would have looked over my left shoulder to see if I could see the airline bearing down on me.
So there's very specific language that pilots are accustomed to that would allow them to avoid such a collision.
I believe that is the case, and that is what I am personally believe and understand, and that's my experience, is a very, very direct call from ATC.
Okay.
And there's certain things that you always call back as a pilot. And then typically if ATC is working, and I'm not blaming anybody right now.
Sure.
And nobody should blame anyone until the investigation is complete. But if ATC had said, I think their call sign was BAT 25. They said, BAT 25, you're 300 feet. I need you to, descend and maintain 200 feet. That's another call that I'm used to. Descend and maintain, or climb and maintain.
Okay.
So the lack of that call could become what's considered a factor in this mishap. Now, they may not have seen that, and that goes back into whether or not ATC was overwhelmed with a shortage of personnel.
Okay. We've got just 3 minutes left with you, Colonel. I've got 3 questions for you, or at least one statement that I want to get your response to. First off, you told me earlier that when you were flying and you've flown Reagan, or, that same path, if you will, lots of times, given your military experience, but at 100 feet, why are they flying at 200 feet? If you had to fly at 100 feet, I assume you had to fly at 100 feet because that's safer for airplanes to fly above. Am I wrong, Colonel?
You are not wrong. I do not know when or why they changed that regulation, but I've flown that route a couple times. I even flew up to that area when I was in flight school in a Jet Ranger, a long, long time ago. And I always remember it was no higher than 100 feet. I don't know when they changed it or what prompted that change, but that was another thing. When I heard the 200 feet regulation, I was surprised by that. I was like, oh, they raised it 100 feet.
Wow.
Why they would? To make it safer for the helicopters, because when you're flying at 100 feet over the water, you only have a second before you fly into the water, whereas if you're at 200 feet, you have a little bit more time. So I suspect that's why they did it, but I do not know for sure if that's why they did it.
Okay. Only a minute and a half left. Is there a car like, I asked this yesterday, you explained what it was, but I just want to do it for the sake of this audience, a car-like sensor that would make you aware that there's another airliner or helicopter, something near you?
Yes. What we call a TCAS, traffic collision avoidance sensor. The jetliner has those. My airline buddy says that they typically go off around 1,400 feet. That way it doesn't overwhelm the pilot. I understand the Black Hawk did not have it. Most helicopters don't. I don't know if there are some anywhere in the military inventory that does. The reality is, in that environment, it would most likely be turned off anyway because there's so much traffic. It would just keep going off.
That makes sense.
Become dangerous to the pilot.
That makes sense. Okay, that makes sense. I was just getting ready to say, well, they need to make it mandatory, but you're right. It would be dinging all over the place. I will say this, Colonel, we only have 30 seconds left. Listen, we obviously the investigation has to play through, but I do believe there's someone to blame, and I do believe that that's former President Biden. I also believe that that's former President Barack Obama. This is me speaking. They lowered standards at the FAA. You got a lawsuit with the Mountain States Legal Foundation, 2,500 air traffic controllers that haven't gotten a job because of DEI. So I hope that regardless of why this accident occurred, this part of it ends. I'll just leave it there. Colonel, I appreciate you joining us so much. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thanks for having me. Have a wonderful night.
Hey, Carl Jackson here for MyPillow. For years, customers have been asking if MyPillow sells cross necklaces like the one Mike Lindell proudly wears every day. Well, they are excited to announce that Mike has partnered with a jeweler right here in the USA to create beautiful sterling silver My Crosses. You can save 30% today using promo code Carl. That's CARL at mypillow.com. Click on the radio podcast square or call 800-858-0263 and be sure to use promo code Carl, CARL. We don't spell it like the communists. All right. So you can choose from the women's or men's style. The My Cross for women has a more delicate look and is reversible with mother of pearl style translucent white enamel on one side and onyx styled black enamel on the other side. The My Cross for men has a slightly larger cross with onyx styled black enamel and a slightly longer, thicker chain. This amazing offer won't last long, so order now, por favor. Just go to mypillow.com, click on the radio podcast square, or call 800-858-0263. Use promo code Carl, CARL. All right, welcome back to the Carl Jackson Show. Again, I'm joined with my guest, Colonel William Burner Dunn, retired Marine, flew helicopters, actually flew combat missions, 30 years. He's got a book out, Gunfighters Rule. You guys make sure you check that out, Gunfighters Rule, wherever books are sold, Amazon as well, I'm sure. Strategic Resilience Group, LLC, is his business. Right now, but we're talking about the midair collision that occurred in D.C. And we talked about a lot of technical things, but offline, I honestly didn't ask one of the most basic questions, and I think this is so very important given the conversation that we were having. And the Colonel mentioned that, and that is, we need to know, when was the last time, if you think of so you have a pilot on that Black Hawk, Colonel, you said a co-pilot, and you have a crew chief. And the crew chief is the person that's typically sitting out the side of the door, whether it's to the left or the right, sometimes a gunner. When was the last time? I know that the young lady had 450 hours, and I'll be blunt, I don't know how many hours the men had of training time. And it isn't my goal to knock this young lady because, I mean, she's military. She was allowed to be up in that helicopter, whatever position she was in. But if she was a pilot or co-pilot, and all I did was think, okay, 450 hours. I don't know the significance of that time, Colonel. So you'll have to explain that to me. But even if she flew 450 hours, or whether that's the case with the other men, a better question is, when was the last time that she flew?
Yes, and here's the key takeaway. Pilots are very good at being pilots typically. Okay. It's hard. You have got to be dedicated. It doesn't matter where you come from. It doesn't matter your gender. It doesn't matter your race. If you are a qualified pilot, you have worked your butt off, period. You can't, some people, and I've seen this myself, have given what I consider extra chances. I'm not implying that happened here. But the most important question usually in a mishap, or I won't say the most important, but one of the most important, is how current were the individuals? Now, the investigation will point that out. If you have 450 hours, that should be enough to be a very solid pilot in any platform.
Okay.
1,000 hours, I believe the instructor had over 1,000 hours. That's a great deal of flying. A typical Marine Corps Cobra pilot, we would fly about 20 to 30 hours per month. So about 240 to about 360 hours a year. So if you got 1,000 hours, you're looking at probably a 3 to 4 year pilot. And if you got 450 to 500, a 2 to 3 year pilot, depending on where you're flying.
Okay.
In combat, you may fly 65 hours a month or more.
Okay.
Now, where you become dangerous, as any pilot can tell you, is when you're not current. And what I mean by that is there are rules that we have in the military that you have to fly so many night hours, so many day hours, so many instrument approaches to stay current. And then oftentimes, if you haven't flown in a period of time, you get rusty. And the investigation needs to look at that and determine whether these pilots were current, and they very well may have been. They may have flown the day before.
Sure.
They may have flown every day in the last 2 weeks.
Right.
The more you fly, the more often you fly as a pilot, in almost every scenario that I've ever seen, the better pilot you are. That is also why you go to refresher training. That's also why you go to recertifications, because if you're flying, for instance, out to the ship, you have to do a series of events before you're current and qualified to land on a ship. So that needs to be asked. I would be shocked if the investigation does not amplify that, and it may become a non-issue. They may have been flying every day for the last 2 weeks. If that's the case, they're very current and they should be very proficient. And here's the one dilemma of this whole story.
Okay.
No matter what, we don't necessarily know why, but the Black Hawk in everything we've seen was at least 100 feet too high.
And
we need to find out why.
Yeah, this is and I like to find out. And again, I'm not subscribing blame because we simply don't know. But it's frustrating, and we were talking offline, Colonel. I'm frustrated that DEI even has to be a part of the conversation. Frankly, as bad as it is, I can understand. Sadly, people are overworked. ATC. They're shorthanded. It's a horrible situation. That airport, as busy as it is, should have never been. The air traffic controller, there's no way there should have been 2 people that left early. I believe it was. It just should have never. It should have never happened. But I hate that DEI is part of the equation. And again, we don't know. We don't know if the female pilot was, given more chances because she was a female, and I simply don't know. I suspect not, but who knows? Because going back to this legal group, again, Mountain State's legal foundation. Now, this isn't regarding the pilot, but at least with air traffic control, I've got to ask the question there too. And I just feel like that shouldn't be a part of the equation. And I do, as I said earlier, I place blame on former President Obama. I place blame on former President Biden because they lowered the standards in the FAA. They lowered the standards for anyone that wanted to be air traffic controllers. They gave deference, Colonel, to people as far as people that were training to become air traffic controllers. They gave deference to people. And I forget, I literally had a quote. It was unbelievable. But to people that literally really had no experience whatsoever, compared to people that had a military background, training with airliners or whatever it may have been, air traffic controller training, scored well. That's why you have 2,500 white men that were not given jobs, that were qualified for the position, and now there's a class action lawsuit against the FAA. I just hate that this has to be a part of the conversation. Scale from 1 to 10, Colonel. Air traffic control. How important is an air traffic controller in flying?
It's 20.
Wow.
It's above 10. It is the most important aspect. because every pilot is relying on air traffic control to keep them safe. When you are flying instruments, you cannot see anything but clouds. You can't see traffic. If you don't have radar on board your aircraft, and most helicopters don't, you are relying 100% on your air traffic controller.
Wow.
So it is the most important, I believe. I know pilots will argue this, but in the big scheme of things, air traffic control is probably the most important aspect of safe aviation in this country, period. The second is the pilot, because then the pilot's responsible, but the pilot can only see when he's able to see. Most of the flights that take place in this country, especially with airliners, are going to be all under direct control of ATC. So it's the most important aspect. And I say this, every American should be outraged if it turns out that DEI had a 1% impact on this mishap. Now, I do want to touch on the one thing about the pilot.
Okay.
I have flown in combat with both female pilots and female crew chiefs.
Okay.
And they were just as tough, just as strong, just as good as any male pilot or any male crew chief that I've ever seen.
Right.
They met the standard, and I'm not going to speak for women, but I suspect that every woman pilot and every woman crew chief feels the same, that they want to be measured by the same standard of everybody.
Sure.
Nobody wants to fly with a pilot regardless if the regulations were reduced for them.
Okay.
Nobody.
That makes sense. And that's the way.
Well, and once again, there could be someone out there that says, well, I don't care. I doubt it. Everybody wants to go to combat that I know with the best of the best, the strongest, the most aggressive warriors out there. And I think these pilots that were flying in that Black Hawk may have felt the same. I hope they did. And I don't think they would be happy at all if anyone was thinking that they got there because of DEI. And I hope to God they didn't. And I hope there's no indication of that. I suspect there won't be, because being a pilot is hard. You can't fake it. You've got to be able to fly. And I just hope that that's the case. And if it is, every American should be outraged. Everybody.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Every American should be outraged. It's sad that it even has to be a part of the conversation. And I just hope to God that it isn't the case. And I don't suspect that it is the case. At first I was really concerned, but I don't suspect that it is. I'm hoping that it's not. But honestly, let's be real. DEI has permeated every facet of society, including the FAA, air traffic controllers. I don't feel like this young lady, Captain Rebecca M. Lobach, should have to have the stain of that conversation on her. But hopefully that wasn't why she was flying. Anyway, thank you, Colonel. God bless you. Appreciate you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.